Hi, this is Kim from CSG Consulting, and today I wanted to talk to you about the C in CSG Consulting. CSG Consulting is named after a philosophy that I work with that is surrounded about setting goals and building solutions that are scalable and will provide growth. So CSG stands for clarity, scale, and growth. And clarity is the most important part of starting any supply chain projects or any consulting engagement. And it's the first thing I always start with every client. So the first thing I do when I start with a client is try to understand what is the goal that they're trying to actually accomplish. Not what they think they want, not the solution that they think they need, but what is the goal, the actual measurable, financial, or metrics-driven goal that they're trying to accomplish. And that is what drives clarity. So the first thing I do when I work with a client is sit down with them and document what is it that they actually are trying to accomplish. As an example, I worked with a client last year when they engaged me. They said that their goal was to have shipping zone skipping. And so what they wanted me to do was to set up a fulfillment network that would allow them to have 2 locations in the United States so that they could engage in zone skipping. Their understanding of zone skipping is that it would drive down their shipping cost. And as such, this was the goal that they were focused on, zone skipping. But it wasn't actually the goal of the engagement. What they were really trying to accomplish was driving down shipping cost and their overall fulfillment cost. And zone skipping could be a possible solution to that, but not necessarily the solution to that. So through working with them, by gaining clarity on what they're actually trying to accomplish, I was able to determine that zone skipping was actually not the solution that they needed, but it was a potential solution for the problem that they were experiencing, which was exorbitant fulfillment cost. And so through this process of working with them and driving towards clarity, we discovered that the fulfillment costs were in part driven by shipping, not driven entirely by their shipping cost. And so through diving through their business requirements, understanding what they do on a daily basis, understanding who was monitoring what was going on in their fulfillment network, or who was not actually doing that work, I was able to uncover that a lot of their fulfillment costs were driven by poor processes, expensive handling, unnecessary work, and lack of communication with their current provider. The biggest eye-opener for this particular client was the fact that no one was really watching what was going on in their fulfillment network. Now, while they thought that they had a good control and they thought that they had a great relationship with their current fulfillment provider, it turned out that they were not monitoring what their provider was doing on a proactive basis. They were doing it on a reactive basis, so they waited for a customer to call in to tell them that they didn't get a shipment, something was missing, they didn't know what was going on, and at that point in a reactive phase, they would start to contact the fulfillment provider to find out what was going on with their packages and sometimes uncover problems. So they may uncover a problem that their inventory was low or that there was damage to some inventory that had not been reported. So the client was not actually proactively engaging with their fulfillment provider, which was leading to additional cost. So the first solution we put into place was some monitoring and metrics and reporting that this client should be doing on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis to ensure that their fulfillment provider was actually meeting the goals that were set for them. And identifying that there was an issue early on so that they could reduce costs and keep the inventory flowing. The second thing that we had uncovered with this particular client was that they had built process upon process upon process over time and had never really taken a step back to make sure what they were doing really worked for their current product and worked for their current customer. And as such, what we found is that there was a lot of marketing work that was taking place in the fulfillment network that wasn't necessary. There was also a lot of extra handling that was happening that wasn't necessary. But these were decisions that were made over periods of years, and since no one had actually taken a look at the actual benefit of any of these things or the actual cost of any of these things, or proactively managing how these processes were impacting fulfillment, it wasn't something that they were aware of. And it was driving up, and it was continuing to drive up their cost. The last thing that we discovered as part of this process, not only was fulfillment expensive, but they were also doing 3 types of fulfillment. And at the time of engagement, they were only focused on their e-commerce fulfillment. They were not focused on their FBA prep. They were not focused on their merchant prime fulfillment. They were not focused on any of the kitting and special work that was happening through the marketing team. They were only focused on their actual shipping cost of their products. And once we uncovered that they actually had 3 problems and not 1 problem, that allowed us to really address the issue holistically. And so the clarity we were able to drive from just the business requirements gathering and and through a discovery process was that shipping wasn't their only problem. They had a multitude of problems. They had a problem with managing their current provider. They had a problem with shipping cost. They had a problem with fulfillment cost. They also had a problem with not knowing what one department was asking and what the other department was providing. So through this clarity process, we were able to break these down and address each issue and reduce fulfillment and shipping cost overall. So the first thing we did was identify that they needed to have an employee who was experienced in fulfillment and was focused on managing fulfillment for this company. The second thing we identified was that they needed to put reporting and metrics in place that would allow them to proactively manage what was going on with their fulfillment center and not waiting for a customer to tell them that something was wrong. If we could just focus on that for a minute, the worst thing an e-commerce company can do is wait for a customer to tell you that you have a problem with your fulfillment. The problem has already happened and has probably already happened for hundreds of customers by the time one customer calls you to tell you that there's an issue. Not to mention the money and time that you have to go through to rectify that issue after the fact and find out how many times it's already happened while you weren't paying attention. So the second thing, and then one of the most important things, was to put in place weekly, daily, and monthly metrics so that the company could ensure that the fulfillment provider was doing exactly what they were supposed to do in a timely fashion, and that enabled them to identify any issues right up front. The third thing we did was identify all of these additional processes and heavy handling work that was happening within the network. So what the company was not measuring was the cost associated with all these special processes that the marketing and customer services department had asked for. And no one was monitoring the cost of those or even the time that it was taking to process all these special handling requests. So by identifying that all of these additional processes had been added over time with special packaging, adding marketing material, kitting, all this additional work had added up and it slowed down the fulfillment process and was also adding costs because the fulfillment provider was charging on an hourly basis versus something that was known up front and negotiated as part of a contract. And finally, the fourth thing we identified was there is a shipping issue. And yes, there was an opportunity to relocate shipping to a more central location in the United States, and we were able to reduce shipping costs by doing that. It did not mean that we needed to have 2 locations. And what the client had failed to understand at the initial request to address zone skipping through multiple fulfillment centers was that you have to split your inventory. And at the client's current shipping volume, splitting their inventory into 2 FCs was actually going to cost them additional money, not save them money. Any savings the client was able to get through zone skipping by locating inventory in multiple locations was offset by the cost of managing 2 fulfillment centers. And not only was it the cost of actually managing the 2 fulfillment centers, there was also a cost associated with splitting the inventory in 2 locations. And this would require the client to hold less inventory on a monthly basis. So through this process, we were able to still save the client money, but not do it through zone skipping, which was what the original engagement was for. So by doing this, the client learned a tremendous amount about their operations, their business, and how to run it on an ongoing basis. So by getting clarity of purpose, we were able to identify the exact problems that the client was experiencing that were actually driving up their fulfillment cost in total, not just the cost associated with shipping, which is where the client was originally focused. So at the end of this engagement, the client didn't walk away with one solution, which was zone skipping. They walked away with 4 solutions. And these solutions will allow them to continue to build their business and continue to save money on an ongoing basis without the continued use of a consultant. And ultimately, the fulfillment solution that we put in place for them would allow them to engage in zone skipping when it made sense for their particular business, not just to address the single problem that was happening in their network. And this is why clarity of your engagement, your project, your purpose is so important to ensure successful outcomes in both supply chain and consulting engagements.